This week on The Perfect Scam.
I said, Dad, they've been working on your house for a really long time. And, are they just about wrapped up? And he goes, oh yeah, this is the last check. Finally done. Finally, these guys are out of my hair. I told them no more work, $450,000 later. And at that point, I think my ears just shut down and stopped listening to the rest of what he was saying because I knew that was wrong.
Welcome back to The Perfect Scam. I'm your host, Bob Sullivan. So many of the scams we talk about here on The Perfect Scam happen virtually. The communication takes place over email or social media. The money changes hands electronically. But some scams still happen in person, beginning with something as simple as a knock on the door. And these crimes are really troubling because, well, the criminals know where you live. David, who lives just outside Seattle, got a knock on the door like that about a year ago. It was two men who said they were doing construction on a home nearby and noticed something was wrong with his roof. They could fix it, quick and cheap, they said. The fix turned out to be anything but quick or cheap. David found himself targeted by an international crime ring, one that might be operating in your neighborhood right now. But David managed to help bring at least part of that gang to justice. That's what they get for messing with a Navy veteran who worked at Boeing for many decades and his determined daughter, Rebecca. Let me explain to you a little bit about David, who had recently turned 80 when all this started and celebrated, as someone who worked on airplanes might do.
He went skydiving for his 80th birthday.
That's just amazing to me. Is this the first time?
No, that was his 5th, I believe. Yep. So he said he wanted to do one more and from a higher altitude and be able to free fall a little bit longer. So he paid for the upgrade to be able to jump out from a higher altitude. Yeah. And did a tandem skydive on his 80th birthday with all the family looking on.
You didn't do it. He did it.
No, I did not do it.
I can't imagine skydiving myself. But so when your dad comes to you and says, I'm turning 80, I want to jump out of a plane, what do you say?
Well, we actually bought him the gift certificate. He said that he wanted to do it one more time. And so I knew that it had always been a dream of his pretty much since his 75th birthday. And we figured, well, why not?
Why not? Well, I can think of a few reasons why not, but that's me. David, and let me just say now, we aren't using his last name for privacy reasons. David worked as an electronic technician in the Navy, in Guam, and at sea. Then when he got out of the service, he eventually landed a long-term gig at Boeing.
I was in Naval Reserve at the time, and a lot of the guys that I was in reserve with, they work at Boeing, and so they told me that if there's a hard way to do something, Boeing will find it.
Did you work on specific aircraft?
I worked on all of them, but I worked for what they call the wire shop. We built the wiring. At that time, we were building the wiring for all the airplanes and all the boxes that go into the airplanes. And so with talking to other employees, they only worked on one airplane, but in our particular shop, we worked on all of them.
Many people who are from Seattle will tell you that those were the glory days of the city, when Boeing was its biggest employer and the NBA basketball team was called the Supersonics for a reason. Do you remember anything about growing up with a dad who worked at this big airplane company?
We did get taken to the Museum of Flight quite a bit. And then
sure.
Dad always grew up, taking us to air shows as well, which still to this day, we try and make it to Seafair every single summer together. Blue Angels, of course, are the highlight. But yeah, definitely a big part of the life, going to airfields and watching planes take off and land quite a while. And then, he would talk about, I used to work on this plane and I used to work on this plane. And he was a quality assurance inspector, so took great pride in that.
And about 50 years ago, David moved his family into the house that he now lives in today with great pride, just a bit north of Seattle. David lives in this home by himself, so he was alone that day when the unexpected visitors arrived.
I was just minding my own business, doing whatever, and then the doorbell rang, and this loud voice came bursting through the door saying, "We were at your neighbor's house." And we noticed that there was a hole in your roof, and that caught me by surprise, totally unexpected. And I knew that the shingles had been replaced less than 2 years. And so he says, let me get up on the roof and take a picture. And so he got his ladder out and took a picture.
And sure enough, when this man comes down from his ladder, he shows David a shingle that needs repairing. And also, he says, there's a lot of moss on the roof. But these two construction workers, they turn out to be brothers named Matthew and Patrick McDonough, say they can come back and take care of David's roof, that because they're already working nearby, it won't be that expensive. But when they come back to do the work, they have more bad news. David's foundation is cracking, they say. And foundation problems, that's kind of scary, right? That's a big deal.
Yes, they said it was cracked, and above the crack is where the wall looked like it was bulging. Wasn't very noticeable if you're just walking by it, but he made it sound like that it could get worse, especially if I had an earthquake. Foundation may not hold.
The foundation may not hold? Well, that's certainly scary. But Matthew and Patrick are insistent that the work should be done as soon as possible. They'll need a fairly large deposit, a check to pay for materials. But the two men seem trustworthy and charming. They have Irish accents. David can tell partly because his family heritage is partly Irish.
Patrick was the guy that had the booming voice, and he was I'd say probably at 250 as far as weight goes, and, big guy. And Matthew was the quiet one, and he's the one that actually handled the checks. Patrick would let me know what the check's for, and they need to have it so they can get their material or pay the labor or something along that line. And so Matthew kept telling me what it needed to be, how much needed to be paid, and that his name had 2 T's in it and things like that. But Matthew was a quiet one, and Patrick was the one that acted like the boss of the crew that was working on the house.
A few days go by and the work begins. A crew comes by to begin some difficult digging.
They dug a trench along the foundation. And what happened after that, I don't know because I wasn't at home, but they supposedly had put a layer of concrete down into the trench and a metal plate on top of that, or the other way around. It was a combination of metal and concrete. Then by the time I saw it again, it was all buried.
It's extensive work, but not really out of line for a 50-year-old home.
There was no reason to question the work that Dad was having done on his house. I know it's an old home, right? It needs maintenance and repairs, just like any home does. And so there was never any reason to question anything.
Sure. And anyone who hasn't lived in the Northwest, someone saying there's moss on your roof is the most believable thing, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
But it seems like the more they work, the more problems they find. They want to put in a new walkway to the house.
Growing up, we had wood slat walkway, which every time it rained, it got super slick, and it was not very safe for anybody to really walk on. And it was, of course, starting to rot. And so a few years ago, that was taken out. So it had just been kind of dirt and moss at that point. So getting something a little bit more permanent in was, I think, an appeal to him at first.
But when they ask for more money to pay for construction of that walkway, David starts to feel a bit squeezed. By now, there's been a $15,000 check, a $20,000 check, a $26,000 check.
I asked Patrick, I says, what are you trying to do? Clear out my bank account? Or, I need something to live off of with when you guys are gone. And, they kind of made fun of that a little bit. I thought it was just too much. But here I am, I've had work done. And how do I say that's enough and not have the work get finished? And so I don't know where they would have left me standing as far as what needed to be done. And so I thought it'd be best to just let them go ahead and finish. But at the same time, I kept questioning the checks because they just kept asking for more money. And I says, it's just one of those things that You tell me that we're through writing a check, and then you come back the next visit and they're asking for more money. And then, of course, the other thing that I thought was interesting is, almost every other day, did you tell anybody what we're doing? Have you told your friends or your neighbors? And I thought, well, if they're doing a good job, I can give them a good reference, I guess.
Meanwhile, some of David's children start to wonder about the small construction company, which is now working on all these various projects at Dad's house.
Yeah. So my sister, who now lives out of state in Tennessee, she brought it up. I brought it up. My mom, who does not live with my dad, but we're still very tightly connected within the family. And my cousin, who lives in Oklahoma. So he was sharing that, work was being done with multiple family members. It just started raising a few red flags to family members when, like I said, they started shifting into different disciplines that were not the original scope of work.
And after about a month, Rebecca decides she really needs to bring it up with her dad.
Yeah, so mid-January, I gave my dad a call and we were talking about other stuff. And then he told me, oh, the guys just left. And that's when I brought up to him, I said, Dad, they've been working on your house for a really long time. And, are they just about wrapped up? And he goes, oh, yeah, this is the last check.
The last check? Well, that should be good news. But not when Rebecca learns how much all those checks have added up to.
And he did let the number slip at that point, which was the very first time I had heard how much money he had paid them. And so when he told me, yep, last check, finally done, finally, these guys are out of my hair. I told them no more work, $450,000 later. And at that point, I think my ears just shut down and stopped listening to the rest of what he was saying because I knew that was wrong.
Her dad had paid these two men who came to his house in increments over several weeks about $450,000.
There's no way that the scope of work that he had done cost that amount of money. And as somebody, I'm in my 5th house now, and I know that you can practically take a house down to the studs at this point and rebuild a brand new house for that amount of money. There was no way that what he had done cost that much. And so I muted my phone, because I started crying. And I didn't want him to hear me. And I got my husband, who was working from home, and I told him, I said, Dad's been scammed.
Oh, God. Rebecca doesn't hesitate about what she needs to do next.
My husband, of course, was trying to get more information as I was on the phone with my dad. And I did tell my dad, I said, I unmuted the phone and I said, we need to call the bank right away, because he had told me that they had just left and that he had given them their last check. And I asked him, how long ago did they leave? And he said about 10 minutes ago. And I said, we're calling the bank right now and we're stopping payment on that check.
So Rebecca calls her dad's bank to stop payment on the check, but she doesn't even wait for an answer. She jumps in the car with her husband. They live only about 45 minutes away from Dad.
So as soon as I was on hold with the bank trying to get through to a teller that would do a stop payment on the check, I told my husband, we're in the car, let's go. And so he stopped his work day. Luckily, I'm self-employed, so I was fairly flexible on being able to jump in the car. And we immediately started making that 45-minute drive to be able to be with him, to know that this was a bigger deal than what I think he initially thought it was.
What's going through your mind?
I'm just trying to see how we can fix this. I'm a doer. I'm a problem solver by nature. That's a big part of my job as a wedding planner. And so just trying to figure out, what are the next steps? What can we do?
Were you scared for your dad?
Yes, very much so. Just knowing the financial hit that took. At that point, I wasn't necessarily scared for any physical safety at that point, but that did change when we went to his home.
That fear changed because it's dawned on Rebecca the criminals know where her dad lives, and they might be angry when they can't cash that last check. So she decides to insist that they take her dad back to their home that night. So you get to the house. At that point, does he really understand? Like, has it sunk in for him yet that it was a crime?
I don't think so, to maybe some degree, but even when I was trying to get him to move out, he kept insisting, no, they won't come back. They won't do anything. I told them this was the last payment. This was the last payment. I'll be just fine, and it was really a big insistence. And when you get to know my dad, he's a bit of a stubborn guy, likes to do things his own way. And, he is independent. He does live by himself as an 80-year-old man. And so there was definite concern for his safety once we got to the house, and knowing how much he had paid them, in seeing the actual physical check carbon copies, and knowing, like, I just stopped a $19,000 check. What's to say that they are not going to want that money back as soon as they realize that a stop payment had been put on it? And that was my primary concern, is he's been paying him and paying him and paying him up to this point, and then all of a sudden they don't get their money. Like, who knows what they're capable of?
Here's how David remembers that afternoon. And then within an hour, she's at your house telling you to pack your things and go home with her, right?
Yeah, I didn't necessarily agree with that, but at the same time, I understood their thinking, and I'd rather have them not worrying for what's happening to me. And so I enjoyed my visit here at the house too.
I'm sure. But at that point, did you think, I'm never going to see this money again? Or were you still hoping, that maybe the work was legitimate? Or did you see it as a scam at that point?
I was hoping the work would be somewhat legitimate.
Yeah. But as Rebecca and David start to talk through what happened, the scale of the crime becomes even more apparent.
I think the biggest concerns, of what we heard from the story was that Dad kept insisting and asking for some sort of invoice or even a business card or something, and they would never give it to him. And even at the end of all of this, they said, oh yeah, we emailed you an invoice. And of course they hadn't.
And they also discover that Dad is in an even bigger financial hole than Rebecca could have imagined.
When he did allow them into his home, and when he finally started saying, I have no more money, they actually coached him through how to withdraw money from his 401k and to take out a home equity line of credit.
Oh, God. Now convinced she's dealing with professional criminals, Rebecca decides to take even more precautions.
So while he was packing, we had brought over video cameras from our house, and my husband went to work in getting various video cameras set up to face the front door and the driveway, and just make sure that if they did come back, that they were captured on film.
Wow, you guys are organized.
We try.
Within an hour, you already had this whole video system figured out and everything. That's really impressive. I mean, I was shocked that you would even think of that, but you had it together enough.
Yeah.
And as her husband is wiring up the cameras, Rebecca calls the police. What's their first reaction?
Well, then initially the responder, the dispatcher on 911, she said, oh, you can just fill out a police report online. And I told her, I said, ma'am, this was almost $500,000. And she goes, oh, okay, I'll put you through.
Soon, a police investigator is on their way to Dad's house. They provide as many details about the crime as they can, but the officer doesn't leave them with a very optimistic message.
There was no hope at that point of getting any of the money back, but the reporting officer, that I'm pretty sure was probably fresh out of academy, he took all the notes and was very gracious, and he said, I'll submit this to the detectives and we'll have one of them give you a call. And that's how he left it.
But after Rebecca gets her dad settled into her home, she's not ready to give up that easily.
I called my dad's neighbor and I asked him to set up video cameras from his perspective of the back deck overlooking the main easement to be able to catch to see if they went by. And then day 2, I told our Bible study, we do belong to a church out here, and I told our Bible study what had happened. And 2 of our group of Bible study members are police officers. And so I asked them, straight up, what do I need to do to make sure that this actually gets some attention? And they said, well, we hate to say it, but the squeaky wheel does really get the grease. And so you call every single day and ask what is happening with your case. And so that was day 2. I called the police office and asked, has a detective been assigned to my case yet? And that also is day 3 and day 4.
And while Rebecca continues to be the squeaky wheel, they get a break. The criminals do come back to the scene of the crime several times.
With my dad's neighbor setting up his video cameras, he was excellent. He was such a huge help. He sent us recordings every single time he saw that white truck drive by, every single time somebody pulled into Dad's driveway, which was quite often. That happened very regularly for about 4 days after we stopped the check.
Oh my God.
Yeah, they went by day and night scoping out his house.
That would be so freaky to me.
Absolutely. And it was very validating that we took him away. Dad didn't want to come initially, and seeing them drive by so many times was, well, that's the reason why we took you home.
At one point, they got out of the car and sort of looked in the windows to see if your dad was home.
The perpetrators themselves did not. So Matthew and Patrick did not get out of the vehicle. The two gentlemen that they had doing contractor work on this job with them, they were the ones that they sent to the front door. And we did capture them saying, the old guy's not home, peering in the front window, going around to the back of the house even, and going and looking through those windows as well.
Oh God, that's really disturbing. The police were interested in that, I'm sure, right?
Oh yeah, we set up a case report file with them and uploaded every single video that was, of them driving by or going to the house to that file. So they had every single time that they had driven by, which also gave them plate information as well as vehicle information and also photos of what they look like.
The videos are important because at this point, it's not clear that local police will decide to prosecute the case. Rebecca has been advised that they might treat it as a civil dispute and just advise the family to file a lawsuit. But the videos help convince a detective to look more deeply into Matthew and Patrick. And
he was able to put ties together between other states, a very similar MO of how these folks operated with coming to the house. We've been working in your area. You need work on your home. And then taking people for tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars.
there is a pattern. Reports of unfulfilled construction projects by these two men, reports from all around the Pacific Northwest. And that's when you find yourself talking to an FBI agent, right?
Yeah, I never thought I would have a direct line to an FBI agent, but here we are. So, yeah, we had a very kind of almost, like a friend was coming over conversation out on my front porch, just talking through the case. And Detective Ethan Vai happens to specialize in criminal cases that focus on fraud. In his past life, I believe he was an accountant, so numbers are his thing. And he came out and just had the conversation specifically about the amount of checks that were written, about the wire transfer that was given, and just really trying to dissect this case a little bit more.
And now that the FBI is on the case, that means federal prosecutors are involved too. And that's how the case lands on the desk of Assistant U.S. Attorney Lauren Watts-Stanier.
I thought it was absolutely devastating. I mean, this person is a valued member of our community. He is a veteran. He served one of our great sort of local institutions, and in just about 2 weeks, his retirement savings were decimated. And we knew right away that, this was a very bad crime that we needed to quickly investigate. And then what we were able to learn over the next kind of couple of weeks is that it really wasn't just David. It ran deeper than that. And so that was the real talent of the FBI, and what they're very good at is kind of connecting those dots to crimes across the country.
It doesn't take too long for Lauren to determine the scope of the crime.
Yes, so one of the great law enforcement tools that the federal government can use is we can look around the country and try to identify other victims of a scam. And the FBI is extremely talented at doing this, and the agent assigned to this case, he's a very experienced agent. And so he was able to identify, just through law enforcement reporting and financial information, that there were other victims of this scam. This was essentially a traveling roadshow of fraud, skipping from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and they eventually landed in Washington state.
And that makes it clear this isn't just a case of an argument between a contractor and a consumer.
what I was so proud at our local law enforcement that they were able to pretty quickly see that this fell into the latter group of scam and not the former group of, gosh, I hate my contractor, and they really did, overcharge me and did cruddy work. And the telltales that law enforcement noticed right away with this scam were a couple of things. Number one, just the sheer amount of money so quickly taken from this victim, $435,000 over the course of about 2.5 weeks. And, the detective who responded, he jumped up on David's roof and saw, gosh, there's no work done here. So that was a telltale sign right away. And the story that David told of these contractors coming into his home, sitting at his dining room table, asking about sources of money, just no contractor works that way. So we knew from those telltale signs that this was likely a crime and not just a kind of civil dispute about a cruddy contractor.
So, while the FBI works on getting an arrest warrant for Patrick and Matthew, they're also working with banks to track down where David's nearly $500,000 had gone. And in a stroke of great fortune.
The status of the money at that point was on hold. We did have all of the agencies working on seeing if we could get any money back. And fast forward again until, let's see here, I believe that was August or September, we get a call from the police department. And he said, I got $200,000 back of your money because of that wire transfer.
Wow.
So
that never happens.
It never happens. And like I mentioned earlier, nobody thought we were going to get any money back out of this case at all. But because they had done that one wire transfer for the high dollar amount of $200,000 to be able to buy repairs or equipment for the foundation repair, that was the money we were able to get back.
My God, that must have felt amazing.
Oh, it was huge. That was elating. We thought all of it was gone. So to get almost half of it back was incredible. True miracle.
Remarkably, half their father's stolen money is returned. But at this point, as far as they know, Patrick and Matthew are still out there. But these two fake construction workers had stayed in the area, and within a couple of months, the two brothers are arrested and charged with committing fraud across the U.S. Rebecca goes to the arraignment. It's the first time she sees the men who stole from her dad in person. Did you have any impressions when you looked at them?
Not particularly. Just I had seen them off of the cameras that we had caught of them driving by, so kind of already had an idea of what they looked like. Dad said when he saw them sitting there at the arraignment that he wouldn't recognize them on the street. He thought that they looked much cleaner cut than they were when they, came and did the work at his house. So I guess they were getting some clean cuts in prison, but
Did they look at you or your dad?
They did not at the arraignment.
Soon after, Matthew and Patrick plead guilty. The news is covered around the world. The BBC even writes a story about these brothers from Ireland who had been convicted of crimes all across the US, in Illinois, in Oregon, in Washington. Rebecca and her father go to the sentencing to plead with the judge that he impose a stiff sentence. Here is part of her victim impact statement.
This theft has profound implications for my dad's future. As an elderly man, he faces the very real possibility of needing long-term care in the years to come. The significant financial loss these men inflicted has stripped away his ability to plan for that care, compromising his safety and security. It is heartbreaking to see my dad at this stage of his life feeling ashamed, taken advantage of, and uncertain about the years ahead, all because of this man's deliberate and selfish actions. This case just isn't about financial restitution. It's about preventing this man from inflicting these kinds of pain and harm on others in the future. I ask you for the sake of justice to impose a sentence that matches the gravity and intentions of his actions, which will continue to impact my family and Dad's life for years to come.
The judge gives the two men 18 months in prison time. That doesn't sit very well with either David or Rebecca.
It was very discouraging, especially knowing that they will be extradited back to Ireland after they serve their federal prison time here in Seattle. And so restitution is part of the agreement, but it is, we have heard from all of the agencies, don't hold your breath on getting any money back once they're back in Ireland.
I felt shortchanged. I thought they should have got a lot more, but something's better than nothing. The judge asked me, he says, we know you want your money back, but if they're in jail, do you think they can make any money to pay you back? And I says, well, I thought about that with making that statement, but at the same time, anything's better than nothing, and they definitely need to go to jail.
And while David did get back about half of what was stolen from him, he's still dealing with fallout from the crime. He's got a $30,000 home equity loan to repay, for example. What was it like to see your dad go through this?
It was heartbreaking. He is a very independent guy and he loves living on his own, and he does a really good job at maintaining the home and especially to his neighbors, and he's constantly cleaning up outside yard debris, and every single neighbor knows who he is. And I think that was just really tough to see that even in a close-knit community that these things can still happen.
And as far as the financial impact, he's now looking at a very different next stage of life than he was before, right?
Absolutely. I don't think the financial implications have quite gotten through in Dad's thoughts, but as his daughter, just knowing, we're now in the later stages of life, and knowing that, I don't know what the actual statistic is, but that so many elderly citizens do need long-term care, whether that be in home or in a facility. But knowing how much that costs, good facilities are about $15,000 a month. And even in-home care is pushing that number as well. To know how much money they took, in my view, they honestly took about 5 years of his life away from him.
Lauren, the prosecutor, wants to stress to Perfect Scam listeners how alarming this kind of door-to-door scam is.
It's really scary. It's a really scary part about this crime. Yeah, I can't emphasize that enough. And, it was a scary part for law enforcement. I mean, we want our victims and our community members protected. It's just, it was scary. It was one of the many reasons why we felt like this was such an important case to bring, and one of the many reasons why we as law enforcement tried to work as quickly as we could to bring these folks to justice.
I mean, you just don't know what they're capable of at that point, right?
Yep, that's exactly right.
And it has to be a reason why some people don't report the crime. Because, I mean, if you accuse someone who has been coming to your house and knows where you live and probably even knows, when you're home and when you're not home, if you accuse them of a crime, who knows what kind of retribution you might face. And that's got to be a real concern for a victim in that situation.
I imagine it is, and that's why, again, Rebecca and David, I just laud their bravery and their, courage in coming forward, because it is not an easy thing to do, and they did it. And because of them, I think many other people will not be victimized by this type of crime, because they'll have the education and understanding of, hey, this could happen to me. I know what to look out for.
It's important to know that these kinds of door-to-door construction scams are a real problem nationwide and across Europe too. In fact, you'll find news reports from all around the globe. Many times the construction workers who knock have an Irish accent, though one news story I found described it as a British accent.
One of the things that is interesting about this case is we have heard, after prosecuting this case and kind of getting the word out, we have heard from more and more victims of this type of scam coming forward. And that's critically important, is for victims to say, hey, I think this might have happened to me.
This is the kind of crime that victims might not think to report. I think a lot of victims end up in the same headspace that we just talked about, right? If you're a victim of a crime like this, you might think it's just a construction deal gone bad and not bother calling the police, right?
That's exactly right. And that's what these fraudsters count on. They count on their victims kind of not knowing or maybe not understanding the scope of the quote unquote work that is being done. So let's just take victim David as an example. The key or the core of this fraud was the claimed work on the foundation. So these brothers told David, hey, you've got a crack in your foundation. It's really damaging your house. You've got water leaking in, and we can fix it. Now, the foundation, we live in old houses. foundations might have superficial cracks, but that's not really a problem. And then, these brothers dug a huge trench in the victim's yard. So the victim is looking and thinking, gosh, I don't know very much about foundations, and it looks like they're doing work. And that part of the fraud is really designed to convince the victim that these guys are legitimate contractors. They're doing the work that they claim, but that really wasn't the case here.
But someone who was a homeowner might see a trench and figure, well, I guess I did what they told me to do. I guess that's right?
That's exactly right. And I think that's, Bob, that's one of the reasons that we've been getting so many calls from potential victims of this type of scam, not necessarily of these two people we prosecuted, but of this type of scam. And it's because, these folks may have thought, gosh, that was a weird experience. It sat wrong with me, but I guess I just pay the contractors and move on. And really what we're hoping to communicate to these victims is, think again, because you may have been the victim of a crime, and we need to know about that.
A vital key to the successful prosecution of this case was the quick work by Rebecca and her father, David.
Rebecca is such an advocate for her dad. And, one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about this work is I, too, like Rebecca, have aging parents and aging in-laws. And, I'm constantly on the lookout and vigilant for how they might be victimized by scams. And Rebecca really did everything right here, from ensuring that law enforcement took her dad's complaint seriously, which we really did, to following up consistently, to, being willing to talk to media and getting the story out there so other people know to look out for this crime. And just kind of from the first moment I met Rebecca, I knew that she would be a total force and that her participation in this case would potentially help many others from being victimized like her dad was.
If you want to be an advocate for the victim of a crime like this, do this.
The first thing is, in many cases, your first call should be to your financial institution, to either your parents' bank or your bank. And the financial institutions are real allies in combating frauds like this. And what the financial institutions can do, and what happened in this case, is, for example, put a stop payment on a check. So Rebecca was able to call her dad's bank and say, hey, these checks, they're no good. They're going to scammers. And the bank very quickly could put a stop payment on that last check. So if you suspect that your aging parent or your neighbor or yourself might be the victim of a financial crime, your bank is your first call. The second thing that Rebecca did is she, called law enforcement right away, and she was able to explain the gravity of the situation. And as I mentioned, the person who responded was this wonderful local detective who worked with the King County Prosecutor's Office. And what they did in this case, which is, I certainly don't see it in every case, and I wish I did, is they were able to seize a bunch of David's money back from the bank account where it ended up. So, that's acting quickly like that. Number one, talking to your bank. Number two, calling law enforcement. Those two things can help protect your money. And then, keeping all receipts, keeping all communications, writing down notes about what happened. So when eventually you're talking to law enforcement and trying to bring these folks to justice, we have a clear picture of what occurred. And oftentimes an email account, a telephone number, a scrap of paper that might seem like, oh gosh, this doesn't mean anything. It means the world to the FBI and to the U.S. Attorney's Office, because sometimes those are just the little threads that we need to find who is ultimately culpable for this crime. But I can't emphasize enough, first call your bank, second call law enforcement.
Okay, I'll emphasize that again too. Unless you're in some kind of immediate danger, your first call should be to your bank. Okay, so how can consumers spot a construction scam like this?
These scams, many of them follow a similar MO. So the scams roll out as someone knocks on your door and says, I'm doing work in the neighborhood and I have some leftover materials. And I noticed you have, and it's sort of enter whatever superficial thing about your house that they notice. But really common ones are a hole in your roof, moss growing on your roof, or masonry work needed by your chimney. So if anyone comes to your door and just kind of cold knocks and says, I'm doing work in the neighborhood, I have leftover materials, I've noticed you have a really bad crack in your chimney, that's just tell them to get off your front porch. And I've had this happen to me. So it's common.
Just for people who don't live in the Pacific Northwest, there is moss on the roof 100% of the time.
Yes, there is always going to be moss on your roof. Do not worry about the moss. It is just, it's like sand in the desert, it's not a big deal. But I should say, we're sitting here in Seattle. This is a really common crime across the country. We've heard from investigators in Rhode Island, in New Jersey, in Massachusetts, that this is something happening all over our country. And frankly, it follows a really similar MO. So, and by MO, I mean sort of modus operandi. But that's the first step. Contractor knocks, and you might say, hey, I'm not interested. That's when the contractor may get, or the supposed contractor may get aggressive. So they may say something like, this is really serious. Your house is going to fall down. And as you know, Bob, that's a common scam tactic across all sorts of scams. And what they're doing there is they're exploiting kind of what makes us human, our id decision making. They want to create some fear and manipulate that fear. And what makes this scam so pernicious is it's your house, it's your home. It should be a safe place. You want to make it secure. And they're manipulating that too. So they're trying to create a sense of fear and a sense of urgency. At that point, the contractor might show you a business card or a piece of paper and say, this is my business. And, this is kind of what we do. But they won't let you take that card. So if you say, hey, I'll take this and do some research, they don't want their victims to do that research. So they're going to kind of be sneaky about trying to take the card away. So that's another red flag. If you say, I'd like to do some research, get a second opinion about the masonry on my chimney, and they start to get aggressive, you should have your red flags up right there.
It is scary to have somebody say that your house is in danger, right?
Absolutely. There is a reason that this is a successful scam. It's because it targets people's homes and because they sometimes will do superficial work. Like they may get up on your chimney and kind of move a brick around and then say, okay, that's going to be $80,000. And, that's just, you may pay it and never know you're a victim. And that's, again, why these prosecutions are so important and why, Rebecca's work getting the word out there and your work getting the word out there is so critical. But yeah, we don't want our houses falling down.
No, right? Yeah, and again, all of us, most of us are not construction experts, right? So we don't know if someone says this to us. But I'm guessing that also at least one part of it is, they're in the neighborhood, maybe this will be cheap. And I was kind of meaning to get something done, get the moss off the roof or whatever anyway, right? So this can seem like an easy opportunity, for a good opportunity for the consumer, right?
That's exactly right. And that is exactly what David thought here. And totally reasonable thing to think that, gosh, I have been meaning to get this moss off my roof. So I'll just let these folks do the work and, I'll pay them $600 and we'll be done with it. But really what that, quote unquote, moss cleaning or masonry work is a foothold. So unfortunately, while it seems really easy, you just gotta have some questions about someone who cold knocks on your door. And Bob, one of the things that we heard from victims over and over again in this case is, I just felt like I was too far in to back out. I felt like I had to pay them for the work that they did. But what we also know from investigating this and other cases is oftentimes the scammers will quote an exorbitant sum for that foothold work.
And real contractors have real invoices and real checking accounts, and you get 30 days to pay them, right? It feels much more like a regular business, right?
That's exactly right. And they should be registered in whatever state you live in. One of the tricks these guys do, as I mentioned, is they have this flyer that they won't let their victims keep. And so if you have work that you need to be doing on your house and someone knocks on your door, just say, okay, I'm going to take a picture of this flyer and I'll give you a call back after doing some research and figuring out exactly what I need to do. And that's one of the other red flags of this scam is they'll ask you to pay right away. They'll ask you to pay a deposit. So, okay, we need, a $15,000 deposit for this construction work that we're going to be doing. And any of that should just raise your awareness and say, okay, I need to step back. I need to take a beat. I need to, call a friend, phone a friend, as I say, and just sort of talk through whether this seems weird.
I'm going to do my thing here where I stick up for consumers at the moment. It's always been great advice. You have anything done on your house or in lots of situations, get 3 bids, right? At least get a second opinion from someone. But, for a construction project of any kind, it's always good to get a couple of companies in and to give you an estimate, right? And in a situation like this, if you were to do that, it would probably protect you. However, it's really hard to find people to do work on your house now, right? Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, that sounds nice in theory, but oh my gosh. And that's why, again, if someone comes to your house and says, hey, we're in the neighborhood, we can take care of this today. Like, oh, thank goodness. I know how hard it is to find a contractor, right?
Absolutely. Yes. And it's why this scam is so effective. And I got to say, I don't always get 3 bids when I do work. I'm a busy working mom. I mean, I got to check off my list, and I understand that our consumers and our victims are in the same position. And that's why we want you to just watch out for these particular red flags.
Of course, David and Rebecca are going to struggle with the fallout from this crime for years. But for Rebecca, at least some good has come out of all of this. How does it feel that you and your dad have really helped bring down part of a big international crime ring?
To me, it feels great. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm a doer. And so to have this done and to have it be such a great outcome of really uncovering such a broader scope of what we even thought it was for us makes me feel really good. And also with being able to meet the folks that we have in law enforcement and to see how doggedly they work on these cases and how tiring it is for them. We're so incredibly thankful that they do what they do because they were able to get these guys caught. So it just makes me feel like we've done what we needed to do. And as unfortunate as it is that it happened to Dad and our family, maybe that's part of a bigger story. And just knowing because of Dad, and because of me reporting it, it's leading to countless other people not having to go through the same thing and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars saved by people that may have been victimized by them.
Maybe there's partly a reason why it happened to you and your dad. You seem pretty well suited to make those phone calls to the police day after day after day and make sure they stay on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I shared with my community of, what was happening to Dad, they said, oh, nobody messes with Rebecca. So I'm like, well, I'm not sure I want that reputation, but yes, I do have a fighting spirit in me and I was not about to let it go.
Well, I think that's fantastic. And personally, I thank you for the doggedness because unless people report crimes and stay on them like this, nothing comes of it. So I think it's just great that you do this. For The Perfect Scam, I'm Bob Sullivan. If you have been targeted by a scam or fraud, you are not alone. Call the AARP Fraud Watch Network helpline at 877-908-3360. Their trained fraud specialists can provide you with free support and guidance on what to do next. Our email address at The Perfect Scam is
The Perfect Scam Podcast at AARP.org. And we want to hear from you. If you've been the victim of a scam or you know someone who has, and you'd like us to tell their story, write to us. That address again is The Perfect Scam Podcast at AARP.org.
Thank you to our team of Scam Busters, Associate Producer Annalee Embry, Researcher Becky Dodson, Executive Producer Julie Getz, and our audio engineer and sound designer Julio Gonzalez. Be sure to find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. For AARP's The Perfect Scam, I'm Bob Sullivan.